The paranormal experience I'm going to share with you today happened to me when I was a student studying software engineering. I have tried to share this spooky experience of mine many times. Some people laughed, some tried to explain the incident logically, some got bored, but only I know what actually happened and how close it came to breaking me. I have watched a lot of horror movies and classic horror stories, listened to true horror stories and paranormal podcasts, heard people talk about haunted places in America, real ghost stories, haunted houses and paranormal investigation TV shows, but nothing on any screen ever felt as real as the nights in that shotgun house in New Orleans. This is my real-life horror story, my own little American horror story, and every time I go back to that city, I avoid that street like it is cursed. Today I run a small but successful software company out of Austin. I build boring things on the surface, workflow tools, customization software, back-end systems, but a big slice of my life is still code, late nights, energy drinks, and horror YouTube on in the background. My friends know me as the tech guy who always has a horror story time playlist running while he debugs. From creepy analog horror series like Local 58 and Gemini Home Entertainment, to true scary story narrations by Mr. Nightmare, Wendigoon breakdowns of horror iceberg lists, and cursed videos compilations. I can happily watch content about haunted roads, haunted highways in America, haunted prison documentaries, skinwalker legends, backrooms found footage, and horror shorts on YouTube without losing sleep. That is all just content. But this thing I am about to share with you was not content. It happened to me in a real American city, in a very real haunted house. Back then, I was 20. A transfer student who had just landed in New Orleans to finish my degree. I had always wanted to live in a city with real haunted history, American Gothic architecture, that supernatural horror vibe you see in shows like American Horror Story Hotel or episodes about witchcraft and cursed towns. New Orleans is one of those places that shows up in every list of most haunted places, right beside haunted asylums, haunted forest legends, and the Sally House. When I got my acceptance letter, I imagined myself walking down Bourbon Street, eating cheap beignets, streaming horror story narrations at 2 a.m., and laughing at tourists taking paranormal investigation tours with EMF meters and spirit box sessions in the French Quarter. The reality was a lot more practical and a lot more desperate. I needed a place to live that I could actually afford. Dorms were full, campus housing had a waiting list, and I was late to the rental game. I was broke, working part-time, and refreshing Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace like a man possessed. Anything even close to campus was either way too expensive or so sketchy even horror fan me did not want to risk real-life crime, horror. Then I saw it. Shotgun house, 1 bedroom, quiet neighborhood, walking distance to the streetcar. Rent that was so far below everything else that I thought it had to be either a scam or a horror movie setup. The pictures looked too good. High ceilings, hardwood floors, old mantels, tall windows, that long, narrow New Orleans layout where every room sits behind another in a line. It honestly looked like the type of house you would use to shoot a horror short film, the kind of place that shows up in scary stories to tell in the dark, all shadows and liminal spaces. I called the number in the ad immediately. A man picked up on the second ring, slow voice, local accent, like someone who has been in New Orleans since birth. He told me to call him Hank and gave me the address. He said if I could meet him that afternoon, he would show me the place. No application fee, no nonsense. I took the streetcar down, earbuds in, listening to a horror podcast episode about a haunted road called Blood's Point Road in Illinois. Another about Clinton Road in New Jersey. Both haunted highways in America where people swear they have seen ghostly figures, cryptids, or vanished into liminal spaces like Backrooms Level 0. It all felt like entertainment. I had no idea I was about to walk into my own paranormal caught-on-camera moment without a camera. When I got off and walked into the neighborhood, it felt normal at first. Small houses, overgrown yards, kids on bikes, someone grilling in the distance. The shotgun house stood out though. It was slim, long, with peeling paint, iron railings, and a narrow front porch with a single rocking chair that shifted slightly in the breeze. It looked like a piece of American Gothic art, something you might find in a horror lore video or a small-town horror compilation. Hank was already on the porch, leaning on the railing. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a sunburned face and tired eyes. He wore jeans, an old t-shirt from some horror movie festival, and a saint's cap. When I walked up, he gave me this crooked smile and said my name before I introduced myself. He told me he remembered my voice from the phone, that not many kids these days spoke as clearly. Up close, there was something about him that I could not place. Not threatening, just too calm, like he had already decided something long before I arrived. He told me to come in and stepped aside. Inside, the house was exactly like the pictures. Long hallway, living room in front, then a bedroom, then a narrow kitchen, then the back door. The place smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning products, with an undercurrent of something else, like cigarettes and old whiskey soaked into the floorboards. The kitchen had this small wooden table with 2 chairs and a simple overhead light that made everything look like a frame from a psychological horror or slow-burn horror film. The kind of scene where you know something is wrong but you do not know what yet. I checked the water pressure, opened cabinets, looked at outlets like a good software engineering student who watches too much horror and true crime. There was nothing obviously wrong. No black mold like in some deep web horror story. No rotten food, no broken windows. It was old, but it was solid. When I asked why the rent was so low, Hank shrugged and said this city has a lot of places folks do not want to stay in long term. He said this house likes quiet, and quiet people get a discount. He said it just like that. This house likes quiet. I laughed and said, so the house is haunted. He did not laugh back. He just gave that same crooked smile and said, New Orleans has haunted everything. Bars, streets, cemeteries, apartments, you name it. He said this place was active but not malicious, more like my haunted house than a demonic possession story. He told me straight that a former tenant passed in the house, but not violently. Heart gave out one night at the kitchen table. Old man with an old soul, loved his whiskey, paid his rent early every month. Then he showed me the lease. It was pretty standard at first. Term, rent amount, security deposit. Then there was an extra clause, typed in the same font like it was no big deal. Every Thursday night, tenant agrees to leave 1 clean empty glass on the kitchen table. Back door must remain unlocked from midnight to sunrise. Failure to comply may result in termination of lease. I read it twice. I asked him what that was about. He said it was a house tradition, an offering for whoever still liked coming home. He told me it was part of the deal that kept the place quiet. No poltergeist behavior, no slamming doors, no shadow people in the hall. I had spent enough nights listening to paranormal stories, haunted ghost story narrations, Reddit horror stories, and no-sleep tales about cursed rituals and elevator games to recognize this for what it was. It was a ritual. It was a rule. Did it scare me? The honest answer is no, not yet. I was young, broke, and too full of logic. I told myself this was just some local superstition, a weird little urban legend. I thought, I watch horror movies for fun. I binge analog horror playlists. I read creepypasta and real exorcism accounts. I will be fine. An empty glass and an unlocked back door felt like nothing compared to saving a few $100s a month. So I signed. No questions, no negotiation. No deal is okay with him, I remember thinking. My bank account could not argue. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. Every Thursday night before bed, I would rinse a glass, set it in the center of the kitchen table, and leave the back door unlocked. I would double-check the front, lock my bedroom door out of habit, then crash. I would lie there watching horror shorts on YouTube, Japanese horror clips, scary animation, short horror story animated videos, or horror TikTok compilations until I fell asleep. The house would creak like old houses do. Water would run in the pipes. The neighborhood would quiet down around midnight. The first time I heard the footsteps, I thought it was a neighbor outside. Slow, measured steps across the back porch, then the metallic squeak of the screen door, the soft thump of the back door opening against the stopper. My heart jumped, but the rest of me stayed calm. Crime is real horror in America, and New Orleans can be rough. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, and crept down the hallway, every horror movie scene and thriller story set up replaying in my head. By the time I reached the kitchen, the back door was closed. The porch light glowed through the glass. The air felt colder. The empty glass I had left on the table was fogged with condensation, beads of water sliding down the sides, like it had just been filled with ice and something strong. The chair on the left side of the table was slightly pulled out, angled toward the door. I told myself I had just not noticed that before. Brains fill in gaps. Horror lore and psychological horror talk about how we project patterns. I shoved the chair in, picked up the glass, felt how cold it was on my skin, and dumped the water in the sink. When I looked up, my reflection in the small kitchen window looked a half-second delayed, like those analog horror shots where reality is just a little off. I told myself I was tired. I went back to bed. The second week, the noises were clearer. The back door opened, closed, footsteps, a chair scraping, the distinct clink of ice in glass, then nothing. It went on like that for a while. Every Thursday night, the same sequence, the same cold glass in the morning. I started talking about it to friends like it was a funny story. My haunted house, my own personal paranormal activity scene. I framed it like one of those adult horror stories you tell at a party, a creepy campfire story. Some people said it was probably the landlord sneaking in as part of some ritual game. Others said maybe a neighbor had a key and was messing with me. One guy went full skeptic and started throwing words at me like poltergeist, sleep paralysis demon, telling me how many times paranormal activity has been debunked on cameras. A couple of friends said they wanted to do a paranormal investigation, set up night vision like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, or Twin Paranormal and Sam and Colby Paranormal videos. I always laughed it off. I still locked my bedroom door on Thursdays, though. It took time for the comfort to turn into something else. Comfort became curiosity. Curiosity became unease. Unease became dread. It was little things at first. I would wake up feeling hungover, even though I had not had a drink. I would find my laptop slightly moved on the table, my horror YouTube history full of videos I did not remember watching. Sam and Colby, the Paranormal Files, compilations of real ghost encounters in haunted asylums, graveyard shift horror, haunted prisons, haunted forests. It was all content I liked, but I had not clicked those videos that night. My phone would be sitting on the kitchen table on Thursday mornings, even though I always plugged it in beside my bed. One night, as I lay in bed listening to a scary story narration about a cursed doll, like Annabelle or Robert the Doll, the audio glitched. The narrator's voice warped and slowed, then sped up, then dropped into this deep tone that made my skin crawl. For a few seconds, it sounded like someone else was speaking over the track. I pulled out my earbuds, but I still heard a whisper, faint, from the hallway. A man's voice, low, with that same old New Orleans drawl Hank had. "You are too loud, kid." My entire body went cold. Every hair on my arms stood up. I switched off my phone and lay there in the dark, heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I had imagined it, that it was bleed through from some horror compilation or analog horror series still playing in my mind. I forced myself to breathe and eventually fell into a restless sleep. The dreams started soon after. I kept finding myself in the kitchen, standing at that table, the glass in front of me filled with something amber and thick. Across from me sat an older man I had never seen before. Grey hair, sunken eyes, a face carved by hard years and late nights. He wore a shirt with faint stains and rolled sleeves. The kind of guy you might see behind a bar in some haunted road trip video about an old American urban legend. In the dream, he would lift his own glass and say the same thing every time. "Rent is due, son." Then I would wake up with the taste of whiskey in my mouth and the smell of cigarette smoke in my nose. My throat would burn like I had been shouting. Sometimes my right hand throbbed, and when I flexed my fingers, my knuckles ached like I had been holding something too tightly. In the morning, the glass on the table would have a faint ring of brown at the bottom, and the chair would be pushed back like someone had stood up fast. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe Hank really did come by. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe my brain was mixing horror short film imagery with my real life, blending Mr. Creeps and Let's Read stories into weird sleep paralysis episodes. The logical part of me kept trying to stretch reason over everything that was happening, like a too thin blanket over a bed in a haunted prison. Then came the Thursday I forgot the glass. It had been a brutal day. Midterms, group project, late shift at my part-time job. I got home after midnight, exhausted and wired at the same time. I heated leftovers, watched a couple of horror shorts YouTube videos without really registering them, and passed out face down on my bed, still half-dressed. I did not walk to the kitchen. I did not wash a glass. I did not check the back door. I do not know what time it was when I woke up, but it was the kind of dark that feels heavy. The horror narration in my earbuds had stopped. My phone screen was black. The house was too quiet. Not city quiet, not night quiet. A kind of quiet you hear in stories about abandoned places and unsolved mysteries, like sound itself was holding its breath. Then I heard the back door. Slow click of the lock, a soft, deliberate push. The creak of hinges, the sigh of air moving where it should not. The house was shaped like a straight tunnel, and my bedroom sat at the front. That meant every sound from the back rolled through the hallway straight to my ears. Footsteps, heavy, dragging slightly, like boots on worn wood. One step, two, three. A pause, the scrape of a chair, another pause. Then the clearest sound yet, a knuckle tapping the bare wood of the kitchen table. Once, twice, 3 times. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every horror movie I had ever seen, every paranormal story I had ever listened to, every analog horror video about liminal space and backrooms crossed my mind at once. I tried to tell myself it was Hank, but something in me knew that was a better lie than any ghost story. I could not move. I lay there staring at the dim ceiling, breathing in shallow little gasps, feeling this cold pressure spread through the room. It felt like the air got thicker, like the bed got heavier, like my body was no longer entirely mine. People talk about sleep paralysis demon encounters where shadow people sit on their chest. It was not exactly that, but it was close. The edges of my vision seemed to pulse. A chair leg scraped across the floor. Footsteps again, now moving down the hallway, one slow step at a time. The boards under my bed gave a small groan in sympathy, like they knew what was coming. I could hear the sound of ice rolling in an invisible glass, then the clink of it setting gently on some surface. The steps stopped outside my bedroom door. The doorknob turned. I had locked it, but it turned anyway slowly, with that soft metallic grind of old brass. The door opened inward by an inch, then another, then a third. I could see a slice of darker dark in the hallway and the faint outline of something tall standing there, just beyond clear focus. The smell hit me next. Cigarettes, cheap whiskey, old sweat. The smell of a bar at closing time or a graveyard shift diner in some night shift horror story. For a second, nothing happened. Then the mattress dipped beside me. Weight settled down, like someone had sat on the edge of the bed. I felt it pull the fabric tight under my hip. The hair on my arms and neck stood up again, my skin crawling as if static electricity ran through it. Something cold brushed the back of my neck. It was not a hand and not a breath, more like the edge of a glass, icy, touching skin that never agreed to it. "You forgot us, kid." The voice was right by my ear. It sounded exactly like it had in the dream, only now it carried a weight, a vibration. Every part of me wanted to scream, run, throw myself out the window, but my muscles were locked. I managed the smallest movement, a twitch of my fingers against the sheet. The thing on the bed shifted. The mattress rose slightly, as if it had stood. Footsteps again, this time moving back toward the hallway, then toward the kitchen. I lay there, counting each one like a lifeline. When the back door opened again, I found my voice. "I'm sorry," I said out loud in the dark. My throat was raw. I did not mean to forget. There was no answer. The door closed with a gentle click. The house exhaled. Sound returned slowly, like someone turning up the volume on reality. A car went by in the distance. A dog barked. The fridge hummed. My body unfroze in a sudden rush, and I rolled out of bed, shaking so hard my knees almost buckled. I did not go back to sleep. I sat in my room with the light on, counting the minutes until sunrise. At some point, my phone buzzed. My brain was still so full of fear that the vibration made me jump. I picked it up and saw a notification from my banking app, "Deposit received." I frowned. I had not done any extra shifts. No one owed me money. When I opened the app, my blood ran cold. There it was, a deposit that matched my monthly rent almost to the dollar. The description line was a string of numbers, like an account reference. The date next to it said the transfer came from an external account. I clicked the reference. It showed a bank name and the words "account closed" with date of closure. The closure date was 1993. I sat there on the edge of my bed, phone glowing in my hand, feeling like I had fallen into one of those horror analog videos where reality and static mix. It felt like staring at paranormal evidence in a paranormal investigation TV show. It was too precise, too neat, too on the nose. In some horror movie, this would be the jump scare moment. In my life, it was the moment my logic finally snapped. I screenshotted everything. Then I texted Hank. "Is this some kind of joke?" I typed. I sent the screenshot. The typing dots appeared almost immediately, like he had been waiting. "They are annoyed, came back, put the glass out tonight, and do not ever ask who is paying." My fingers hovered over the keys. A dozen replies rose and died in my throat. Finally, I wrote the only thing I could. "Come over. Please." He showed up an hour after sunrise. I heard his knock on the front door, that same slow rhythm I had heard on the table. When I opened up, he took one look at my face and nodded like everything he expected had come true. "You lasted longer than the last kid," he said. We sat at the kitchen table, no glass between us, just 2 cups of coffee and a gulf of fear. The sunlight made the old wood look warmer, almost friendly, but I could still feel last night lingering like a stain. The back door stood closed, unlocked. I shoved the phone across the table and told him to explain. He looked at the screen, sighed, and rubbed his face with both hands like someone who had done this before. "Name on that account," he said, "belonged to a man who lived here back in the late 80s, early 90s. He worked nights, tending bar on a haunted road outside the city that you will not find on tourist maps. Had some side hustle I never knew much about. He drank too much, smoked too much, but he paid his rent early, every month, on the dot." Hank told me the story like he was retelling a classic scary story, except this one did not belong on Goosebumps or some kid's horror compilation. He said one night in 1993, the man finished his shift, drove home on some foggy Louisiana highway that probably has its own haunted road stories and American urban legends now, walked into this house, poured himself a drink, sat where I was sitting, and never got back up. Heart failure. Alone at the table. Smoke still curling from the ashtray. Glass still cold. They found him the next morning when Hank came to collect late rent, only to realize it was already paid. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, just a body that had decided it had enough. They closed his bank account, cleaned out his belongings, and rented the place again a few months later. That was when the fun started, Hank said. He told me the first new tenant heard the same footsteps, the same door, the same chair. Glasses left in the sink would end up on the table. Bottles in the cabinet would slowly empty, one drink missing at a time. People smelled cigarettes when no one smoked. One girl woke up one night and saw a man sitting at the table in the dark, head bowed, hands on a glass that was not there in the morning. Some tenants broke the lease and left without notice. Others tried to fight back. They called paranormal investigators, laid down salt, did spiritual cleansing. Hank said one guy went full horror movie, brought in a spirit box and Ouija board, did a whole paranormal investigation TV show inside the house. According to him, the only voices that came through said the same things. This is my house. Rent is due. One tenant changed the locks and started locking the back door. That did not go well. Hank's face got serious when he talked about that. He said the guy woke up with bruises on his arms like someone had grabbed him, heard whispering at his ear all night, saw a shadow in the hallway that stretched wrong, like something from an analog horror series, too tall for the ceiling. Windows opened on their own, doors slammed, plates fell. The guy left in the middle of the night, never picked up his deposit, and never answered Hank's calls again. After that, Hank tried something different. It started as superstition, then turned into a contract. He poured a drink one night, left an empty glass beside it, and spoke into the room. He said, "You pay your part, I keep the house quiet, and we will not lock you out." The next month, the rent arrived early. Half from his living tenant, half from a source he could not trace. The activity calmed down. The haunted house became a functional one again. So now, he said, every tenant gets the clause. You leave the glass, you leave the back door unlocked on Thursdays. You respect that someone else believes they still live here. You do not ask who is paying, and you do not treat this place like content for your horror YouTube channel. It is not a cursed TikTok trend. It is a man who never left. I asked if it was just one spirit. He shrugged. Maybe now it is more. Maybe my quiet deal keeps other things away. The city has enough unsolved mysteries, enough vanishings, enough missing people and dark history. He said this house could be worse. It could be another Sally house, another haunted asylum. Another place where poltergeist activity and demonic possession stories start. Instead, it is one stubborn old soul who still pays to sit at his own table. I sat there, staring at the wood grain under my fingers, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, run to some brightly lit dorm with no history and no haunted lore. Part of me knew I could not afford to do that. I was stuck between horror and broke, so I asked him the only question left. Is he dangerous? Hank looked around the kitchen like he was checking whether we were being overheard. Then he shook his head. Not if you respect him, he said. Not if you follow the rules. He's not a skinwalker in the woods or a Wendigo lurking in a haunted forest. He's not a demon in some real exorcism footage. He's just a man who loved his house more than he loved the idea of moving on. But if you shut him out, if you lock him out of the only place he remembers, he will remind you that you are the guest here. I stayed. I stayed for the rest of that year until I moved in with friends closer to campus. I never forgot the glass again. Every Thursday night I would clean it, place it gently in the center of the table, and unlock that back door. I would go to bed with horror narration videos playing, storytime horror about other people's ghosts, real paranormal stories from haunted highways, true horror narration about haunted prisons, and I would make sure the volume stayed low. The footsteps continued. The door, the chair, the faint clink of ice. Sometimes I woke up feeling that weight on the bed, like someone had sat down for a second to check on me. Once in a while a whisper brushed my ear, not words, just a sound like approval or disapproval. Twice more, random deposits hit my bank account on months when I was late on my share of the rent. Always the same amount, always traced back to the same closed account from 1993. I never tried to record it. I never set up cameras. I did not want to turn it into content for horror YouTube or an analog horror playlist. The idea of hearing his voice on playback, of catching him in pixels like some backrooms found footage, was more than I could handle. This was not a horror movie. It was my life, and sometimes horror is only survivable if you do not poke it for views. When I finally moved out, I left the key on the table next to the glass. I stood in that narrow kitchen, sunlight slanting through the window, and felt this strange mix of gratitude and raw fear. I said that I was leaving, that the next kid would take care of the place, that I appreciated the help even if I never asked for it. For a few seconds, the house felt warmer, like someone had turned on a space heater under the floorboards. Then it went back to normal. I walked out, closed the door, and did not look back. Years later, running my software company, building systems for people who will never know what it is like to share a house with a ghost, I still get targeted ads for horror movies, horror short film playlists, horror podcasts, and scary campfire stories. My algorithm thinks I am just a guy who likes scary content, analog horror, creepypasta, paranormal stories, haunted places in America, cursed rituals, and true crime horror. It has no idea that every time I hear a faint clink of glass in a bar or smell cigarette smoke in an empty hallway, my brain goes straight back to that shotgun house. Sometimes, on boring nights in my safe, modern apartment, I catch myself rinsing a glass on a Thursday for no reason. I will put it on the counter, stare at the table, and feel the old fear rise in my chest. Then I remind myself that this is not New Orleans. The back door here locks whether a ghost likes it or not, but I will tell you the honest truth. I've never again left a back door unlocked after midnight. I've never again signed a lease without reading every strange little clause. And every time I see a rental listing that feels too cheap, too picture-perfect, too much like the start of a horror story, I think about that man from 1993 who still pays rent from a closed account. People can laugh. People can say it was a glitch, a banking error, some elaborate prank. They can call it a psychological horror moment, a stress hallucination, an overactive imagination powered by too many horror channels and creepy YouTube videos. Only I know what actually happened in that house. Because one night, long after I moved out, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. No message, just a name in the contact field. Rent is due, son. I blocked the number. I poured myself a drink, and I made sure every door in my very living, very unhaunted home was locked tight.